Okay, so we're going to talk about starter health. Essentially, whatever breakdown of bacteria and yeast that you have in your starter when you mix your dough, that is what your dough is going to have in it. So if you're a very intense maintenance feeder who feeds their sourdough starter twice a day, discards some, feeds it more, and then whenever you're ready to bake, you feed that more to make the bread, that means that you're creating the most ideal conditions for your bread. That is like the best way you could possibly do it. It means that you're probably going to have a lot of consistency, that your bread will turn out the same every time because you're basically keeping your starter super, super active and giving it new food, often twice a day, and you're not ever really letting those over fermenting acidic bacteria take over. If you leave your starter for a whole day on the counter, is it dead? No. Did you do the worst thing in the world? No. Did you let me down? No. But what you did do is you kind of essentially created an overproofed or over fermented, really not proofed, an over fermented starter. So the yeast has gone dormant because it ate everything it could when you gave it a feed, and then the bacteria started taking over, which is why the starter got more acidic. It's like people messaging me saying, why is my starter so acidic? You're probably just not giving it enough flour and water. It is always hungry. The yeast is eating the little bit it can, and then it goes dormant because there's no more food for it, and the bacteria is taking over. If you're giving it a bunch of flour and it's taking a long time to peak, then you're probably balancing it out and it's not super acidic. It's always going to be acidic because it's a sourdough starter and it is inherently acidic. Same thing goes for putting your starter in the fridge. You're just changing the chemical, the bacterial and yeast balance in the starter. When you put a starter at a cold temperature, the yeast goes dormant because yeast likes warmth, and the bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, which makes it sour, starts to go crazy because it doesn't mind those cold temperatures. So while it's totally fine to put it in the fridge, and that's a very good way to keep it if you're not going to bake often because it will eventually die or mold on the counter. On the fridge, you can leave it indefinitely. I do suggest that you give it quite a few feedings before you start to bake with it again because you're essentially using a starter that got super acidic and doesn't have as much yeast. And when you're trying to make bread, you need that yeast to be really active so that your dough doesn't start to break down and get super acidic before the yeast does its job. That's why when people are saying my dough is sticky no matter what, I never get my dough to be strong or rise well, you probably have a very acidic starter, which means you're taking a very acidic thing and you're giving it flour, water, and salt, but the balance of those microorganisms are already off. You need to have very active, healthy yeast to have an active, healthy loaf of dough that you're going to turn into, container of dough that you're going to turn into bread.